Soma,
Hi.
back in. How you doing?
Doing well. Good to be back here.
Outstanding to have you back. So it's a big week for developers. What's going on? I mean,
We are just about putting the finishing touches on Visual Studio 2008 Beta 2 as well as the .NET Framework 3.5 Beta 2. We are
Right.
looking at putting them out for our customer base to start using, to start playing around with this.
outstanding.
It's exciting times for us
Perfect.
and for our developer customers. So
Cool. And we have another special guest here. You look familiar. Who are you? What's going on?
My name is Guthrie, and also in the developer division working for Soma.
Excellent. And so, what's new between the last time I was here, Soma, and which was Beta 1,
right.
and Beta 2? What should I look for as a developer?
So there are two things which is top of mind for me, which is different in Beta 2 than what we did in Beta 1.
Mm-hmm.
One is we are finally feature complete with Orcas. If you remember, when we shipped Beta 1, we had a few features left that we needed to get done. We are we'd done probably about 70-80% of the features complete at the time,
Mm-hmm.
but we are still working on a few more features. Now we are pretty much done at this point in time. We are feature complete. The second thing is we're also providing a go live license with Beta 2, so that if you are an early adopter or you are sort of excited about the cool new things that are coming out, and you want to take advantage of the latest and greatest platform technologies, and you want to use Visual Studio 2008 for that, you can go build an application and deploy it in your production environment, and we'll be there to support you.
Excellent. Now, if I may, what's changed, Scott? I mean, perhaps you'd answer this. What's changed in terms of what was in Beta 1 and might not be in Beta 2 anymore?
Yeah,
Is there any kind of story there?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, for a lot of people haven't looked at Orcas or VS 2008 or .NET 3.5 in a lot of depth yet. If you haven't, definitely worth checking out because there's a lot of really good stuff. For web development, I'd say some of the biggest features that are there, and specifically more refined in Beta 2, include the JavaScript IntelliSense for getting JavaScript inside the IDE, much richer JavaScript debugging support, as well as some really nice enhancements with .NET 3.5 for AJAX apps with ASP.NET. For example, you can now use update panels with web parts. You can now use ASP.NET AJAX against WCF web services.
Nice.
And ASP.NET AJAX is just built into the .NET framework. So no longer a separate download. It just works.
Beautiful.
For better web design, we've taken the Expression Web Designer WYSIWYG engine that's previously in Expression Web, and it's now built into Visual Studio 2008. So you get very, very rich CSS editing support, split view, much better performance when doing HTML web editing scenarios. We now have a new control called the list view control in ASP.NET that gives you complete control over the markup that's output when you're doing data scenarios. So much better support, plugs in nicely with the CSS editing support. We now have nested master pages, so you can use ASP.NET master pages and have multiple inheritance hierarchies of them.
Nice.
For consistent UI. And then on the data space, we obviously have Link, which I think is probably, from a programming model perspective, the biggest addition going into .NET 3.5. And specifically, we have the ability to use Link expressions to query any type of data. So for example, you can query objects and collections and arrays. You can query XML. And then I think some of the biggest things, one of the biggest features going into .NET 3.5 is Link to SQL, which allows you to use Link against a relational database to query as well as update, insert, and delete data.
Nice.
And there's really nice VS 2008 support both for IntelliSense running Link and C# and VB, but also a really nice Link to SQL object relational mapper designer for working against your data. And in the ASP.NET space, there's the Link data source control, which allows you to take any ASP.NET control and bind it to Link really easily. On the WPF side, there's a new support going into WPF for doing data binding against Link data, and obviously also with the WinForm space as well. Then on the client side, we have the WPF WYSIWYG designer going into VS 2008.
Cider?
Yeah, codename Cider, which means that you can now say, filing VS, new project, WPF application or WPF browser application.
Nice.
And basically drag and drop, and it makes it much easier to edit a WPF application. And what's cool is that the designer supports split view, both on the WPF side as well as on the ASP.NET side. So you can actually now either use the designer or type in markup and see changes happen simultaneously every time you hit save or make an update. And so it makes it much easier to build kind of UI in a very rich way inside the tool. Other improvements in the client space include some improvements to click once for Windows Forms-based applications as well as WPF applications. We now support click once and XBAP apps for WPF running inside Firefox. So if XBAPs are no longer limited to only working in IE, you can now run them in either IE or Firefox. We now have support for when you're in client applications to integrate with the ASP.NET backend application services. So things like membership, roles, profile, you can now automatically integrate into either a Windows Forms application or a WPF application and have it roam with you as you go from desktop to desktop. And then we have tons of improvements in the Office space for building client applications. And for example, you can now integrate inside Office 2007 or Office 2007, integrate with the ribbon bar and things like that.
Nice.
So the end package is there's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's also really exciting about VS 2008 is that it supports this thing called multi-targeting, which means that you can use all of these new runtime features I talked about with .NET 3.5, but you can also go ahead and use VS 2008 to open and edit .NET 2.0 projects. And so some of the designer improvements I talked about, like JavaScript IntelliSense, like the CSS support, like the AJAX support, you can actually use today with your existing servers without having to upgrade to .NET 3.5 on the back end just yet. And you can start to take advantage of all those tool benefits. And when you're ready, just easily upgrade to .NET 3.5, and you can use all the improvements.
Cool. Now, I mean, I'm assuming, Soma, that was clearly one of the major feedback points you were getting from customers, was the ability to...
Just to add to what Scott said about multi-targeting, you can take Visual Studio 2008 and be able to write an app that targets .NET 2.0, 3.0, and 3.5. Previously, we would tell you that, hey, go, use different versions of Visual Studio for different versions of the .NET framework. It was always a pain for developers because they had to have multiple instances of Visual Studio on their system.
Sure.
They were building apps that target multiple runtimes, and so there was a lot of feedback that we got, and we said, hey, this time we're going to do something about it, and we were able to get multi-targeting done for the first time in Visual Studio since we introduced .NET framework.
That's outstanding. I mean, that is a big engineering accomplishment. I mean, congratulations. That's very cool.
And one of the reasons I think that made it easier, I guess, for us to deliver this is upfront we said that we are going to take compatibility very, very seriously. And if you look at sort of the compatibility that we are providing between .NET Framework 2.0, 3.0, and 3.5, we think that the compatibility bar is very high. It's as much compatibility as you can realistically provide when you talk about multiple versions of runtime. So once we made that design decision, it was easier to say, hey, since we're going to have a compatible a runtime story here, let's figure out how we can use one tool set to be able to target and build applications that run against multiple runtimes.
Outstanding. And now I can remember, Scott, I was talking, I guess about a year ago, to Carol Grogine, who was then like a Scrum Master running like the new the new way to get things done. And you guys are a pretty big development organization, and it's probably fair to point out that Visual Studio 2008 was probably most likely done in a different model than say 2005 was from a development process point of view. Is that true? I mean, how did it work? How did it end up working out? The new communication, the new sprints, the new model that was implemented.
Yeah, I think it worked out pretty well. We did a couple of kind of changes in how we schedule milestones and how we schedule work, starting with 2008 and .NET 3.5. One of the things that we did, especially in the 2008 timeframe, was to go to a model where we kind of had milestones with much stricter exit criteria for how you exit the milestone, and to schedule kind of our work in a much more staged way. And the benefit there was, for example, all of our testing had to be done on any feature before it could be checked into the product. And one of the things that did was help drive quality, I think, much earlier into the overall development process. And it's meant that even people that have picked up the Beta 1 release, even though it wasn't feature complete, I think one of the feedback points that people had was, wow, this is pretty stable.
Nice.
And and hopefully that holds true also for Beta 2.
Well, theoretically it should, right? If you're testing before you check in, right? You're trying to ensure you don't break the whole machine.
Yeah. Now we've always had a model where we've tested before we check in. The difference was, it wasn't that big a change. I think the big difference that we went to was to basically say we have to be 100% test automation complete before we check in.
Cool.
And in the past, typically we'd be more like 20 or 30% automation complete. And we basically said you can't check in anything until it's met all the criteria, until we've done the security reviews on it, until we've got performance tests to measure it, until a fairly long list of exit criteria. And that's helped make sure that we keep the quality bar high. And from a scheduling perspective, it's also helped us get much more predictive in terms of when something will be done, because we know that unless all these quality gates are hit, we're not moving forward to the next thing. And that has been a big success.
Outstanding.
There are two other things that I want to sort of add to what Scott said. I think we did say that hey, we are going to get away from the notion of code complete and really think about feature complete. Previously we used to say that hey, the development team is going to go write code, check in code, and the test team is going to come along and test things. We'll talk about code complete, we'll talk about test automation complete, we'll talk about test complete, we'll talk about feature complete, all were sort of different disjoint milestones. And we said hey, we'll get away from that notion and say that there's only one thing that we care about, which is feature complete. And we say something is feature complete when the developer is done developing the feature, the test team or the tester is done doing test automation, and so all of that needs to be done, and the test passing at a particular level with a particular level of code coverage before we would call it feature complete, and we would be ready to check it into the main branch from the sort of feature branch or the product unit branch, right? So that was one big change in how we thought about things. And the second thing is we got into the notion of feature crews or feature teams. We said hey, for each feature we'll have a team of maybe 5 to 10 to 12 people that comprises of developers, testers, and program managers, and they're going to be sort of one unit of people working on one unit of work, and they're going to be responsible for feature complete. And let's say the tester or the program manager gets called away for something else. That means that feature crew is going to figure out how to fill that gap and then move forward, kind of thing. Now I would say the first 6 months when we did this, we went through what I call growing pains, or we had to learn how to operate in this model.
Sure.
But I think by the time we came around to milestone 3 in Orcas, I think we started humming along pretty well, and feature teams are working really well for us now.
Outstanding. And I guess the other thing I would ask, clearly what's in it is really important, but architecturally, Visual Studio is evolving, right? In the future, you'll be able to patch on, update sooner. I'm just being hypothetical. I'm just asking about the core architecture of the application is probably evolving along with the feature set. Yes?
Yeah.
Does that?
Yeah, every release that happens, we typically add additional extensibility points into VS. One of the things that we recently did was we talked about this new release, and it's called the VS Shell, which is a set of APIs that and samples and documentation that helps people very easily take the overall VS infrastructure and extend and add on it in a pretty clean way.
Excellent.
So that is definitely something that we invest a lot in and continue to invest.
Can you do so in managed code, or do you have to write C++?
No, you can definitely extend it, the shell in managed code. There's other things like a DSL designer that you can use, and that's actually what I think Link to SQL is built on. This Link to SQL object relational mapper designer is built on top of, I believe. You can absolutely write all that using managed code.
Cool. Now you mentioned, so with .NET Framework 3.5 comes C# 3.0, right, and VB9.
As languages, yeah.
As languages, yeah.
Yep.
And those are some big changes. You mentioned, everyone always talks about link, but there's also some really fundamentally incredible changes in C#, for example, with expressions and lambda, expressions, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
It's becoming more functional in a sense, which is very, very cool.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think from a language perspective, in some ways, this release is maybe even a bigger set of evolutions than anything since, I'd say, certainly the .NET 1.0 release. I guess that was probably the biggest evolution. But in terms of adding kind of new characteristics into the languages, we've taken this concept of functional programming, some of these concepts that have existed for a while, but baked them directly into C# and VB, so that you can, kind of express things like lambdas or closures or anonymous types and kind of these sort of features that other languages have had, but we've kind of integrated them nicely into kind of our core mainstream languages. And one of the things that's been nice about that is not just to sort of add these features for, it's a cool feature and add it in, but more in the sense of it really enables much cleaner interaction with data. And so we've taken the idea of querying data and also added libraries into .NET that we call Link to enable that. And that kind of querying concept coupled with the sort of functional programming features in the language makes for a really elegant way to work against data. And one of the things that I think people are still slowly realizing is that Link's not just about working against a database. Link is really designed so that you can query any type of data. And in the box, we obviously have support for database apps, we have support for XML, we have support for just collections of objects. But one of the really powerful things is that you can you can build data providers that are link enabled and expose any other type of data. So if you search the web, there's now a link to SharePoint data provider that allows you to write, C# or VB, really nice expressions, to go against your SharePoint database, SharePoint list system. So no more camel or kind of having to use an API like that, a very clean, elegant API.
Beautiful. There's
a link to Amazon providers that you can effectively express web service calls, but using just link expressions. And so you can say, select B in Amazon.books where, B.title contains, .net, and return back all the books for that. And the cool thing is, whether you're going in SharePoint, whether you're going to an XML file, a database, or Amazon, the link syntax is the same, the programming concepts are the same, and the amount of code you have to write is just tiny compared to what you have to do today. And that's a really powerful concept.
It's gigantic.
Yeah, I think it will lead to huge productivity wins for customers.
Well, I mean, you're baking that sort of data model right into a general purpose programming language. I mean, that's wonderful stuff.
And as we start working on our next generation database, which is codenamed CH9, the SQL team is working on that. And data access team is thinking about how to build a link to entities provider that will going to ship in that time frame. So that everybody who has data access is thinking about how to use link queries and embed them into their system. So
fantastic. And of course you could would you use Link on the server? I mean, sure, right? Or would you use Blink? Whatever happened to Blink, by the way? Remember Blink?
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, Link, I think you'll see ASP.NET apps in particular really embrace Link pretty quickly because it's why wouldn't you use it inside any server-based app? The performance of Link to SQL, for example, Rico Mariani, his blog actually has done a number of performance benchmarks recently showing some of the beta 2 performance with Link to SQL, and it's if you use this compiled query feature of Link to SQL, it's about 96% of a raw ADO.NET data reader when retrieving data and reading it in a firehose kind of way.
Nice.
And that's a data reader where you're not doing string lookups, you're doing kind of ordinal based lookups. So it's it's a fairly untypical performance scenario, but Link to SQL screams in that scenario. And that just means hopefully performance is a non-issue. In terms of Link more broadly, in terms of Blink. One of the things that you'll see us do is one of the things that we did with Blink. So people who don't know Blink was basically a generator that would create ASP.NET pages that could go against an object data source using Link and Link to SQL to query data. We did a couple things as part of that experiment that we learned. One was in beta 2, we're shipping a new data source we call the Link data source, which removed a lot of the code that Blink needed to generate. And now allows you to bind ASP.NET pages directly against a Link data source. And so that'll be shipping, I guess this video today, that you can immediately start taking advantage of, and dramatically simplifies building web UI against Link. You'll also then see us build a number of kind of what we call dynamic data controls that encapsulate even more of the Blink functionality into ASP.NET. And do kind of all the automatic kind of foreign key generation drop downs for UI and validations and things like that. And so you'll see that probably show up either in August or September of this year. You'll be able to start taking advantage of.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, we're just coming back because I'm just curious. I mean, were there some features that were in beta 1 that didn't make it into beta 2? Like, for example, was there? I think there was some notion of like a dynamic delegate in maybe, who knows? Maybe I was on a different planet when I was thinking of that. But I mean, sometimes when you go from beta 1 to beta 2, the idea could be, well, we tried something, and maybe the feedback was such that we removed it because it didn't seem like people wanted it. But I mean, just let's get more general about it. Does that ever happen when you're creating products where it's like you come up with a new feature or some new construct, and you notice that perhaps people don't use it, they don't care about it, or the feedback is pretty bad, or you realize that, well, maybe we're not really ready to play with this, and then you remove it, and then perhaps you could break a few people because you mentioned incompatibility. Sometimes that happens. Is there much of that in this?
I don't think there is much of that in Orcas kind of thing. No, I'm sure, if I look at the company and the breadth of the products that we do, including products that we do in this division, like there are times when we say, hey, we think we should do this, and we sort of get down the path, and we put it out in a CTP or a beta, and then decide that, hey, it probably either requires more time than what we want for that particular product, or whatever reasons are. I can tell you that Expression, when we shipped Expression 1.0, that there was one feature which was like bitmap editing, that we thought we wanted it in Expression design, and in some of the earlier CTPs that feature was there, and then we decided that hey, given the timing and everything else that we needed to get done, that's a feature that we won't be able to do justice, and we sort of pulled it back and said hey, we'll look at doing it in a subsequent version of the product. So we do that at some point in time. In Orcas, I don't think there is anything big that comes to my mind where we said hey, we're going to do it, we're going to go down this path, and then said we can't do it kind of thing. So
cool. And I know I was just talking over to some of the VB people, and it seems like what they've done with Link is they've made it, because I remember when I first learned it from Anders a couple of years ago, or a year ago on Channel 9, we talked about it. Being a developer, it was weird to me when it was like, from R, select customers where, and now I think the VB people figured out how to do it like select, like normally. Select R or select customers from. And you're like, maybe. I think, as I was just talking to a friend there on camera, he'll be on, Brian Beckman, who's a popular guy. Okay. And I could see if anyone could do it, it would be the VB people, because they always like to stick to what people are used to in the various languages. Anyway, that's a tangent. Let me ask you this, back on topic. What's some of the feedback you've gotten from customers that they're most amped about from devs when it comes to what's coming in Orcas? I mean, what are they just really pumped about? And I would imagine Link
is definitely, I would say, somewhere at the top of that list. The kinds of excitement and sort of early usage has been phenomenal. I'll give you another example. I recently got a chance to hear from some of our TAP customers, what I call early adopter customers. And there is this one customer in Australia who's super excited about Visual Studio Orcas. So we're talking to them and trying to understand, so what is it that is exciting to you about Orcas, right? And they picked Cider, or the tool that we have to help you build WPF apps. They were super excited about that because they have a modeling application, and they thought hey, the features in WPF and the fact that you can now use Cider to build an app in a straightforward, easy way without having to write a ton of code, that was exciting to them. So I think that's something that I've seen excitement from people. The other thing is Office 2007. We have a pretty good set of tools with the Visual Studio Tools for Office in Orcas. That's enabling you to take advantage of the latest and greatest features in Office 2007, and I've seen some customers getting excited about using that for their automation needs.
Excellent. So you're a developer, Scott. I mean you wrote ASP, right, or part of it, or IIS. I mean, come on. So what about the working compiler and stuff like that, and the debugger in Visual Studio? I mean, that's all pretty really nice stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think from I think one of the things that's going to be nice about the overall Orcas release is there's a lot of good stuff there, but it's also a fairly incremental release in the sense of there's lots of value where you can look at it and go, oh, I know how I can use that today. With .NET 2.0 there was a ton of value, but you sometimes there were brand new subsystems to use and take advantage of. Here you can point and say, oh, IntelliSense is better, the debugger is better, the language is better, the CSS JavaScript debugging, or JavaScript debugging or profiling, all those things are significantly better and they're things that you can immediately take advantage of, the moment you install the product. And so, my sense is that actually from an adoption perspective and from a usage perspective, you'll have people actually wanting to use it even faster than VS 2005 and .NET 2.0, just because it doesn't require you to change your app in a fundamental way, and it's lots of goodness that you can take advantage of immediately.
Absolutely.
And that's always good to have.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Because of the levels of compatibility and sort of the multi-targeting for runtime, I do think that like the adoption of Visual Studio Orcas can be or will be more seamless and pain-free than some of the other like sort of big upgrades that we've had to do in the past kind of thing. So I do think it's going to be easier for people who want to move from Visual Studio 2005 to 2008, knowing that all their existing projects and stuff will continue working. They can continue building apps that target the older version of the runtime, and then they can take advantage of the sort of latest and greatest tool support for the new platform technologies that we have. So I think all in all, we feel really good about the story that we have with Orcas.
All right. Well, I can't wait to start using it. So thank you guys. I know you got a lot to do, and I appreciate the time spending on Channel 9. We love having you, and we hope you can come back and talk more.
Yep, it was great. Thank you.
Take care.